Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hello, hello, hello.
We're going to talk today about peaking and what some of you listeners would consider, quote-unquote, doing less.
Are you talking about bicep peaks?
Yes, curls.
Peaking, like peaking for a powerlifting meet or something like that.
Yeah, and this
I gotcha.
This concept can apply to other scenarios as well.
Yeah, well, I think this is a timely topic for us, isn't it? Because a little birdie told me that you have a powerlifting meet that you're hosting coming up soon.
Well, I have a strengthlifting meet I'm hosting.
Oh, it's strengthlifting. Yeah, strengthlifting.
But I think you remember me telling you I'm competing in a powerlifting meet in June.
All right, excellent.
First time in 6.5 years it'll have been.
Interesting.
Cool.
Have you done so you've done a powerlifting meet before?
Yeah, 5.5 years ago was the last one I did, not 6.5. It was 2017 in January. Yeah, 5.5 years.
All right,
and,
yeah. Right on, man.
I've taken a couple lifters. Took one girl in August, one girl in January, and I kind of realized, I need to do this. I don't care about PRs anymore, so I can handle going in and not necessarily getting one, whereas before I was chasing numbers, and it just pissed me off that, you get there and you might not have what you want, and you're just basically playing games with, 9 for 9, or let me get this many points. I hated that because I wanted PRs. So
right, yeah, that's the only reason I go to meets. But I shouldn't say it's not the only reason, but yeah, it's kind of like I've never been in danger of winning my weight class, and certainly not the overall. So
right,
so yeah, it's really just for me.
When in my position, I hadn't pulled 500 before, and all I could think about with tunnel vision was 500. The worst thing was to go to a meet and have it not be there. So I said, The last one I went to, I was like, okay, fuck this. I'm just going to go to the gym, and whatever's there at the gym on whatever day, I'm going to take it. And I think 12 months later, I pulled 500. Took me a year.
Yeah.
No, 14 months later.
14 months?
500.
Hey, I get it. It took me like 18 months, almost 2 years to press a PR. And I had one in the gym. Like I had PRs along the way in the gym, and I just couldn't put it together on the platform at a meet. Mm-hmm. Well, so that's cool. So it's been 5 or so years for you since a powerlifting meet. I know you've done strengthlifting meets since then.
Oh, yeah, I pulled, yeah.
So you're now, and you're hosting one, right, in Wichita Falls?
I am hosting the Wichita Falls Classic in April 23rd at the Wichita Falls Athletic Club. We still have spots available, so please sign up. It'll be a fun meet. You get to hear Rip moderating. He's the announcer.
Yeah.
And, they're just, strengthlifting meets are fun. They're so low stress because, the way out alone eliminates a lot of stress. For those of you who don't know, in powerlifting, you typically weigh either 2 hours or 24 hours before the meet, depending on your federation. And this adds another layer of bullshit where you have to, worry about your weight the week before. Whereas in a strengthlifting meet, you weigh at the very end. There's no line to get weighed in because the next guy is still on the platform doing his deadlift. It's quite nice, quite seamless. There's no silly commands, so you don't have to wait to squat or wait to press. And of course, there's a press, whereas the powerlifting meet, you have to bench press. But they're pretty fun. They're pretty good for first timers and people who don't want to deal with the bullshit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've done a bunch of meets at Wichita Falls Athletic Club because up until very recently, when I moved to Tennessee, it was basically a local meet for me when I lived in Dallas Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. They're really fun. They're well run. They move quickly. I've done meets not at Wichita Falls where there was one meet I did where I had to wait like 27 minutes between squat attempts.
Oh shit!
It was
bench
ridiculous.
Is the worst.
Yeah, and it was like one of those things where you're like, I mean, what are you supposed to do? Like, you just go hit some like singles in between just to keep warm. How much? Yeah, it's confusing. But these meets actually move really fast. You get just enough time to rest between your attempts, but then you're not sitting there twiddling your thumbs either and burning yourself out just waiting. So it's great. I love Rip calling all of the meets too.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. So if you want to do that, by the time you hear this episode, dear listeners, you're going to be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 8 weeks out. So if you want to do this, go ahead and sign up. Take one of those spots that's left, and go for it. It's a lot of fun. It's low pressure. There's a lot of help there. If you don't have a coach, go find one of the coaches that's there at the meet. I've done that for people where I'm handling 1 or 2 or 3 lifters. If somebody else comes to me and they're like, "Hey, I need some help with this," I'm happy to help. So there's lots of support there if you want to go lift and compete and get some experience. It's a fun thing, and in the process of going to a meet, if you've never done one before, you're going to learn something about how to prepare yourself for a peak performance, which is what this episode today is all about. We have a strength bias here. So we're going to talk about this primarily from a strength lifting or powerlifting standpoint, but the same concepts apply no matter what kind of thing you're doing. Whether you're going to a race, you're going to do a triathlon, you're going to do the CrossFit Open, whatever it is, the same concepts apply in terms of programming and training leading up to a competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the same principles applied when I was a swimmer. And when I started competing in strength lifting and powerlifting, I saw the similarities. I had experience with it and I understood it. But the reason I'm bringing up this topic is because we have this problem of forever volume. And, you've probably heard me bitch about this in other episodes in various contexts, but the forever volume problem, as I will refer to it as,
TM.
Stems, what was it, FM?
TM.
TM?
Yeah,
TM.
Trademark.
Got it, yeah. I should trademark that, huh?
Yeah.
The forever volume concept dates back 50 years because the bodybuilders really popularized lifting weights across the world, in the 70s and 80s, and it's kind of continued in the 90s, and, various permutations of this idea that, you have to do all this work in the gym to produce results have kind of surfaced and resurfaced. CrossFit does it, with their AMRAPs and, doing shit for time and, keeping your heart rate up and sweating. And, the fitness people do it. It's this idea that what you do in the weight room must feel like a hard cardio workout has resurfaced in various different ways. In terms of, lifting circles, let's exclude the fitness circles for a minute. There's this idea that, if you ever stop doing volume, you're going to lose all of your muscle mass, shrivel up, and get fat, and, first of all, that's bullshit. Lifting's a lazy man sport. People know this. I mean, it's not literally lazy, but you're not, doing shit all day long like a basketball player or a baseball player or a runner, because it's heavy. You're lifting weights. You can't lift heavy shit all day. Even if you're talking about something that's moderately heavy, you can't do 25 sets of 10 with, let's say 75% of your max. You can't do that.
Yeah.
It's not it's not a continuous activity. It's an intermittent activity. It's intermittent because it's heavy in relation to hiking, climbing, running, baseball, basketball, hockey. You're not moving continuously because you're performing loaded movements. So even a light weight workout or a moderately heavy weight workout, like a quote unquote hypertrophy workout, the 8 to 12 reps with limited rest bullshit, it has application, and
sure,
you could do that, and it's just, it doesn't apply to most people. Typically, people that benefit from that type of training are sufficiently strong lifters, either naturally or through years of training or through drug use. Because when they're doing their 8 to 12 reps with short rest periods, it's being done with several hundred pounds, not with the empty bar, not with 95 pounds on the squat, And this is assuming you're a male. You can, adjust these numbers for females or older lifters, etc. But
yeah,
I read an article once talking about the world's strongest squatter at the time. It was Fred Hatfield. I think he was the first to squat 1,000. And Tom Platz, he was known as the biggest wheels in bodybuilding. He had big, giant legs. They failed to leave out that Platz himself was quoted saying that he's a power lifter, at heart.
Right, There wasn't as much of a distinction back then anyway. A lot of those guys did cross-train.
Exactly, but they failed to mention that in their little article. But I digress.
Yeah.
I think Platts, the weight that they picked, I don't know how they arrived at this load, but they thought 525 pounds was a good weight to pick for the reps to failure. And then they did a 1RM. So obviously Hatfield, known as Dr. Squat back then because he had a doctorate of some sort, he had the higher 1RM because he was a trained power lifter. And then Platts had the greater number of maximal repetitions with 525. I'm just throwing numbers out here. Platts squatted, I don't know, maybe in the 800s that day, something like that. I don't think he squatted 1,000 that day. And I think Platts squatted in the 700s that day.
Yeah.
And on the AMRAP, I remember those numbers clearly. Platts squatted 525 for 23. And Hatfield squatted 525 for 11. So the author's conclusions were, well, bodybuilders, tend to have more muscular endurance and bigger muscles, and powerlifters tend to have higher 1RMs but aren't as big. So therefore, this is how you should train. I didn't say it verbatim like that because, I know I'm dealing with academics. They're going to say, well, I didn't say exactly that, and start wordsmithing and doing that shit they do. But my point is, I'd say 99% of the people reading that article are never even going to have a dream that they squatted 525 for even a single rep. They're not going to squat 525 for a quarter squat. It's just they're not going to load 525 on the bar for anything. If you're lucky, you might get a rack pull with 525 or a shrug, but not even that. How often do you see 525 loaded in a regular gym? Because remember, for us, we've normalized these numbers.
Yeah. I had a recent experience with this. Last week, I had to, travel. I had to do some travel for some emergency travel, kind of, at the last minute. And so while I was out there, I didn't have any of my stuff except for knee sleeves. I threw my knee sleeves and my shoes in there in the suitcase just in case I had an opportunity to train. But I didn't have my belt, no equipment or anything. And I had a couple days I could get out to the gym. So I go out there and it's like 32 millimeter bar. It's super slick. There's zero knurl. There's no center knurl. And the rest of the knurl that was on there might as well have not been on there. So just sliding all around my back. I managed to do 335 for some triples. And same thing with the deadlift. I think I pulled like 375 for like a bunch of doubles just because I couldn't hold on to the bar. It kept slipping out of my hands. I didn't have any wraps. I was like, by an order of magnitude, I was squatting more than all the rest of the gym and deadlifting a lot more than all the rest of the gym. I think there was one guy there the whole time I was there just kind of watching people that squatted like 275 to depth. And he actually squatted it to depth. So respect there. That's unusual. But yeah, there you go. I mean, you don't even see 315 in the gym hardly anymore.
No, I mean, when I first stumbled across starting strength, I wish I could find this thread. It was one of those motivational quotes by Rip that aren't published anywhere. It's just something that I read that, rang with me. And I got to find it someday. It's there somewhere because he doesn't delete anything. He said, you don't see too many 400s and 500s in the gym anymore. And I remember reading that as part of this forum thread, and I thought to myself, well, fuck, I can't do 400 or 500 on anything. So I need to squat 400 and pull 500. That's kind of where those numbers came from. And, I eventually did that, Squatted 445 is the highest I've hit. I pulled 515, got 525 up to the top of my thigh. Couldn't lock it out. It'll be there next time. And, I pressed 225, which that didn't even happen in a dream when I was younger,
Yeah, right.
And even as I got, as I did this for a while, I just didn't think it was going to happen. I never even set that as a goal. I thought it'd be cool, but it was like, getting over 200 was sufficient for me. Then I had a good run, and what was it, 2019? Suddenly it was there, and I took it, and I'm like, fuck, I just pressed 2 plates. It was the coolest thing. But anyways, the problem with this idea that, okay, a bodybuilder can rep out more than a power lifter is that, first of all, you're talking about a competitive elite level bodybuilder and a competitive elite level power lifter who have superior genetics to most people reading that and are on drugs that most people reading that aren't willing to take. They're not mentioning the drugs as most publications don't. And all those things aside, 525 for 11 is not the same as your 155 for 11 that you did. And you know who I'm talking about. You're listening to me right now, and I'm speaking to you.
Yeah.
Most skinny, fat, under muscle novices that hire me, their bench gets stuck in the 165 to 175 range, and then they're going to go read that article, and then they're going to bench press 115 for 10, Right. It's like, guys, it's relative, right? I get that it's all relative. And this tends to be more of an issue with the males. I don't end up having discussions like these with the females. They want more volume for a different reason, typically. But, the males sit there and think that, they have to feel pumped up all the time because that's what, some Instagram influencer told them, or, I don't know who people look up to anymore. They're all pretty much the same to me. But they feel like they need to be pumped up all the time and that they need to do a bunch of work and feel tired and sore. It's just the same permutation of the shit that I got from Arnold and all those fitness magazines of the 90s and early 2000s. But, they want to feel tired. They want to feel sore. And then the idea that they should do less, even though it's with more, wait for it, that they're somehow going to get weaker or lose muscle and everything's going to go to hell. So this is the foundation of what we're talking about here today.
It's crazy. This is a mental affliction, and I can't help you with that. However, one of our colleagues, Dr. Pewter, he's a psychiatrist. He can help you with that. So maybe
Thank you, Trent. We need that. We need to start plugging that.
Right? Yeah. If you Dr. Pewter does some out-of-state coaching and consultations. Mm-hmm. He does therapy in the states that he's licensed in. So if you are in his state or you want some coaching out of state, contact me and I'll get you in touch with Dr. Pewter. But in the meantime, Santana and I can help you with programming and, actually like coaching.
Yeah.
So I think, there's people that get stuck in, I see this in a few different ways. And I realize I coach a little bit different demographic than you, so I see different iterations of the same problem. But yeah, so that you've got some people who are basically looking for the feeling of the workout to be hard, to make them sweat, to make them feel burned out, like to make their muscles feel like they're burning or they're super pumped all the time, and they associate that with progress. And I think we've demonstrated pretty amply in previous episodes why that is in fact not an indicator of progress. It's just a feeling. It's just a transient feeling that's associated with exercise, with vigorous exercise. Instead, the way we measure progress when we're programming and we're trying to get from A to B, right? You're trying to get from where you are today to some higher level of fitness in the future, is we look at the result that's coming out, and are you regularly PRing during your training program? And if you are, then you're doing things right. If you're not, you start to stall out, then we need to make some changes to keep the program progressing, keep the PRs coming. Now, that said, when we talk about peaking for a performance, we have to realize there's something that's going on in your day-to-day training program that you may not be aware of. And this is something I've noticed is missed or overlooked by a lot of people in the starting strength community that kind of understand the template of the novice linear progression and the template of, say, Texas method or heavy, light, medium, or a 4-day split, using an intensity volume split, something like that. They're familiar with the template of how the program is laid out, but they don't really get the underlying principles of how it works. They just know how to plug some numbers in there and get themselves some progress. So I think the best way I can describe that is by going back to our stress recovery adaptation formula, which we've covered here on the show before, and then adding in something else, which some people refer to as the 2-factor model or the fitness fatigue model. So first of all, quick recap. The way that you make progress in the gym, whether it's strength or, a conditioning adaptation, cardiovascular adaptation, is that you have a stress, and that is the workout. Whatever your workout is, it causes a stress if it is sufficiently intense to disrupt your homeostasis, basically. If you lift more weight than you've ever done before, then that is going to cause a stress, which then, if you recover from, that's the recovery part of the formula, you will get an adaptation. You will get a little bit stronger, right? And so we can map out the stress, recovery, adaptation kind of linearly for a while. When you're a beginning lifter, we can map that out linearly and predict where you're going to go in a program. Now, the thing that's overlooked a lot of times is that along the way, you are accumulating fatigue. And this fatigue kind of builds up, especially as you get deep into linear progression, if you're a novice, or as you get deep into Texas method, or even like a slower progression, heavy, light, medium style programming model. Along the way, you are accumulating fatigue that you don't always recover from workout to workout. And we can simply view this with the fitness fatigue model, right? So if we think about the stress recovery adaptation window, right, for a novice, let's say, let's make it easy. Let's talk about a novice. On Monday, they go in and they squat. That constitutes a stress, okay? Now, they have 48 hours to recover from that and squat a little bit more on Wednesday, right? And if they've sufficiently recovered, then the adaptation will mean that they got a little bit stronger. Now they can do more on the following workout. Well, if we overlay the fitness fatigue model on top of that, we would say that, okay, on Monday they squat and it's heavy. So what happens is that transiently their fitness goes down. Because if you squat 3 sets of 5 for, let's say, 225 or something, and that's a PR for you, then you can't immediately go squat 3 sets of 5 for 225 again. Your fitness is down, right? Because you're tired, you're fatigued.
Yeah.
You've spent resources on that event. So your fitness transiently goes down during your recovery window, and then as you recover, as you eat and sleep, your fitness goes back up, right? At the same time, you can look at fatigue. What happens at the end of that squat workout? Your fatigue is higher than it started, right? Obviously, you just squatted a PR. Okay. So by the time we get to Wednesday, to the next workout, your fitness has recovered back to baseline and then gone a little bit higher. That's your adaptation, right? Same thing. Your fatigue has now recovered and you're back to baseline, right? And now you're fresh again. Now you're ready to squat 230 for 3 sets of 5. Okay. So that's a pretty simple model for understanding what's happening to you when you're programming, right? And this is really key. Like, so stick with us, because this is really key to understanding how a peak works for an event or for a competition. So here's the thing. As you get deeper and deeper into a training program, as you get towards the end of novice linear progression, if you've ever done this, you know it gets really fucking hard. And all of a sudden, when you squat maybe 315 for 3 sets of 5 on Monday, when Wednesday rolls around, you are not fresh. You know, it's like you're still feeling beat up from that Monday session. Okay, so what happened is your fatigue did not fully dissipate from Monday. You're still carrying some on Wednesday, right? And then that's why the program starts to change, right? We introduce a light squat day on Wednesday so that you're able to sort of bleed off that fatigue or dissipate that fatigue by the time you get to your next heavy squat. Which now you go heavy, light, heavy. And then, if we go from there, once you move beyond the novice phase, you might go heavy, light, medium. You could do Texas method, which is a type of heavy, light, medium training. So that's a really key thing to understand, is that whenever you are training and you are following a program, if it's designed correctly, then you should be able to maintain it for a while. You should be able to execute the program for a while, but every program is going to run out of steam eventually because of this fatigue problem, right? And so if you've been doing a program for a long time, if you've been constantly building your volume, building your intensity, then at some point you've got to let the fatigue that you've accumulated dissipate so that you can produce a max effort performance.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you're saying all that, I really can't help but to think about something I like to tell people about this. And that's that when it comes to volume and intensity, because that's really, what we're talking about here. When you're doing work, you're accumulating volume, you're accumulating intensity. You're doing a certain number of sets, a certain number of reps with a certain amount of weight, and you're trying to increase one of those three, right?
Sure. Yep.
So for those of you who haven't been listening, volume refers to sets and reps. If you want to multiply the two for a bigger number, you can, but sets and reps typically refer to volume. How many times are you doing the movement? Intensity refers to load. Now, these two variables are related. How they are related is what you really need to pay close attention to. They are inversely related. So as volume increases, intensity is going to decrease. As intensity increases, volume is going to decrease. Whether you want it to or not, if you try to keep volume high and it's time to take it down, you're going to decrease it by missing a rep. See?
Yep.
See how that works? And or more, or 2 or 3. So another way to say this is at some point, it is going to get heavy. It's going to get heavy. You can't just sit here and, add sets. Okay, try doing German volume training, which is 10 sets of 10, right? Try doing that. By set number 5 or 6, you're taking weight off the bar. You are, or they're all submaximal. They're submaximal because they're 10, so that's not the right word. Or they're not heavy enough. You're using light weights that you could probably do more reps with. You're not going to failure, but you're doing warm-up weight for 10 sets of 10. Bottom line is if you put something on there that's reasonably hard, maybe not to failure, but close to, and you try to do 10 sets, you're not going to do the same weight for all 10 sets. You're going to miss after set number 4 or 5. So, you can keep adding sets, but again, the same principle applies. If the intensity is high enough, you're taking weight off the bar as you progress through sets. Then the time commitment becomes a problem. You're not going to keep adding sets and do 35 sets of 10. You're not going to do that, So, typically I think that the programming people call this the Western model. That's what I heard a colleague of ours call it once. You start with, I call it classical periodization. Classical periodization, you start with, higher reps, lower intensity, really more like moderate intensity. We never really do low intensity except when we're warming up. But lower compared to 1RM, so you start with, higher reps, that's a 10 usually, 12s and 15s, that's bodybuilder shit. But, typically sets of 10 are where people tend to start if they're into that. I tend to start with 5s these days. I run 10s here and there because I like them, but if I'm programming others, typically I start with 5s. But the classical model, like the way the guys back in the day used to train, Eddie Cohen and those guys, you start with 10s, you go to 8s, you go to 5s, you go to triples, you go to singles, right? Or doubles. Some people don't like doing singles in the gym, like to finish with doubles. And that's because if you're doing a set of 10 with a sufficiently heavy weight and you're doing a set of 3 with sufficiently heavy weight, the set of 3 is much heavier than a set of 10 because you can only do it 3 times, right? So
obviously.
Eventually you can't add more weight to a set of 10. Eventually you can't add more weight to a set of 8. Eventually you can't add more weight to a set of 5. And as these reps are going down, so is the total volume because, let's say you do 5 sets of 5 and then you move to triples. You're not going to do 8 triples. I mean, you can, but I wouldn't recommend. It's not necessary. I haven't found that to be necessary. It's heavy, but nobody wants to do 8 triples. That takes 2 hours on a squat, probably 3 maybe.
Golly,
You might do 5 triples or 4 triples, or you might do a triple and a few lighter triples. There's lots of different ways to program this, and that's a whole entirely different episode. But the point is, the total number of reps you perform gets smaller. The total amount of weight you lift gets larger, right?
Right.
And you're not going to detrain from that. You know why? Because it's fucking heavy.
Yeah, exactly. And, we could, if we want to use our fancy, programming language, we could say that the specificity of your training it's getting more specific as you are moving down the range of reps down towards 1. Because in this case, we're talking about peaking, right? That's what this episode's about. It's about what's going to happen on the day of the event or the day of the competition. And that's the competition is literally, if you're powerlifting or strength lifting, it's lift 1 rep for as much weight as possible, right? So 10s would be the least specific thing that you're going to do in your training cycle, right? Singles would be the most specific to the actual athletic performance, which is to lift 1 rep for as much weight as possible. So there's a couple of things here, right? Number one, you are still getting a stimulus, you are still getting a stress from your workouts as they go down in reps because, like you said, the weight's going up on the bar. And importantly, it's becoming more specific to what you actually need to do on meet day. Now, some people that are, if you have a little bit more of an endurance bent, or you're kind of more of a CrossFitter or something like that, the same principles apply, right? What do you think Rich Froning is doing 6 months out from the games? All right, I can tell you what he's not doing. He's not doing a bunch of gymnastics and, crushing ergs, right? Mm-hmm. What he's doing is most likely like powerlifting type movements. He's doing things, he's training for strength and to try to increase his base of long-lasting adaptations, right? Because if he was training in like powerlifting style, that would be very non-specific to the sport of CrossFit, right? Because they rarely do 1 rep maxes in CrossFit. They never do that. Now, they will do some strength-focused events like a deadlift ladder or something, right? And that's a pretty high output, but it's not 1 RM. It's not the same as a powerlifting meet. So he's going to stack his training in the same manner we're talking about. 6 months out from the games, he's going to be doing the least specific work to try to increase his overall base of strength, which he can then hopefully carry forward as he tapers away from strength and starts bringing up his conditioning focus, starts doing more conditioning, starts doing the more shorter lasting adaptations, and then also starts doing more skill work, which is going to be much more specific to the games, right? His event. So this same concept, we're going to be talking about it primarily from a barbell standpoint, but it applies to every sport.
Another way to look at this is tens, that's training. Singles, that's practice. Just kind of like in a sport, like football, you have all these drills you do, but that's not what you're doing on the field. That's training.
Yeah, you're not doing monkey rolls in the field.
No, you're not doing cleans and
I hope not.
chin-ups and bench presses in the field. You're playing football. That's football is practice. The lifting and all the other drills, that's training. In the case of lifting, some of these lifts that you do in training are the lifts that you do on the platform. Yeah. However, the way you want to look at it is, the number of reps you do is the differentiating factor. When you're on the platform, you're squatting 1 rep. So tens, again, that is training. You're building up what they call work capacity. You're building muscle. You're building muscular endurance. You're getting a little bit stronger even at that rep range. But when you get down to singles, now you're just practicing. Now, that does not mean that you're building 0.000 ounces of muscle when you're doing singles. I don't believe that's bullshit. That is complete horseshit. You're building a small percentage of the overall muscle you build in a training cycle when you do singles, sure, because you don't spend that much time with them because, wait for it, they're fucking heavy.
Right.
You can't, you're going to spend 3 to 4 weeks doing singles. You don't build that much muscle in 3 to 4 weeks, but the number is greater than 0.
Yeah, so what you're referring to give some more background to this, is that there are some people who have argued that when you do a single, that you are not, at that point, you are no longer stressing your body. You're no longer getting a stimulus. What you're doing is you're just displaying the strength that you have accumulated using higher rep ranges and more volume. That is not in itself a stress event.
Yeah.
Or an overloading event, or however you want to put it.
That's why we feel so fabulous after a meet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You know what? I am freaking
not
wrecked.
Stressful.
Yeah, it's not stressful at all. I was simply displaying my strength. Yeah, that's all it was. No, 48 hours after a meet, I am wrecked. I am totally smoked. And I only did 9 reps total. 3 attempts for each of the 3 lifts.
But it's only 9. I only did 1.
Right? So yeah, clearly, if you've ever actually done some heavy singles, then you know that they are stressful, right? We can see the effects of them afterwards, right? They're stressful, mentally. They're stressful in the central nervous system, and they're stressful to the muscle bellies too, right? There is some effect, right? Guess what? So everything is on a spectrum, right? Yes, they probably aren't. They aren't a huge stimulus for muscle building, but they are something of a stimulus, right? Just like tens are not a huge stimulus for strength, but they have a little bit of stimulus, right? They are a big stimulus for muscle growth too, right? So everything's on a spectrum here, even on the ends of the spectrum. So so that's a little bit more context for that comment you mentioned.
Yep.
So I like the way you laid that out. Now let's take these concepts we just outlined and let's start to apply them maybe towards a theoretical lifter who is going to peak for, let's say they're peaking for their very first meet, right? So we're talking about someone who's maybe at the very end of their novice linear progression, or they're doing like some very early intermediate program that's kind of off the shelf, like a heavy light medium or a Texas method type thing, right? So they've been training. They have achieved they've basically gotten their novice gains out of the way, and now they want to peak for a meet that's coming up in a month, right? So what needs to happen, right? So let's think about our those principles you just laid out. Specificity, right? What do they need to do on meet day? They need to lift 1 rep. That means that you need some practice as a lifter at 1 rep. Like you said, you need some practice for the sport. Then also they need to manage their fatigue, right? So when they step on the platform, if they do it right, they want to be 100% fresh. They don't want to be carrying any residual fatigue from the training they've accumulated over the previous weeks leading up to the meet. So this lifter is going to have to figure out a way to go from a bunch of 5s, right? If you're a male and you're doing Texas method, you're doing a whole bunch of 5s. Or if you're doing novice linear progression, you do a whole bunch of 5s. If you're female, you've probably been doing a bunch of 3s, especially on the squats and deadlift. So they need to figure out a way to go from there to singles. How's that going to happen?
Well, let's start with the novice. With the novice, I just run the LP out till the week before the meet, and then I give them a couple days off and gets it done because, this person has not been exposed to heavy weights yet. He's only done 5s, and that's fine. With an intermediate, typically I'm going to count backwards from the meet, about 12 to 16 weeks, depends how much time you want to spend. And then, I run out 5s for about 3 to 4 weeks. Then I'll run out triples for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then I'll have them practice some singles for about 3 to 4 weeks, with the last week, the week before the meet, just doing some openers and maybe not even deadlifting. I mean, last deadlift will happen like 7 days out. Last heavy squat will happen 7 days out. Then, might do a light squat the week of, and then a couple bench presses or presses, depending on which sport they're competing in.
Yeah.
So what that kind of looks like is, as you progress through week to week to week, you have to be mindful of how close the meet is. The problem with people that are early intermediates is they're married to 5s. You got to pull that psychology out of it, and you have to do triples. You're going to have to do triples. You have to do singles. You can't do 5s forever, because if you haven't been exposed to a true 1RM, you're not going to know what to do with it. So, I kind of keep an eye on a couple of metrics. Number one, what is this person's 5RM? Because at this point, I know it. They've ran an LP. Yep. I know where the 5RM is. When they finish each rep range, because they're an intermediate and you can predictably do this, I want to see a 5RM at the end of the 5 rep range. I want to see a new 3RM, a new 3-rep PR if they've tripled before at the end of the cycle of triples, the 3 to 4 weeks. And then when they do singles, I have a general idea of some kind of semi-broad ballpark of where their, max is going to be. I don't tell them that because we really don't know, You have to do a few meets and max out a few times to really get that. But I have somewhat of a general idea based on what they've been doing. And what I'll do is I'll start with a light single the first week, maybe a few pounds over the last triple, just to get them used to doing 1 rep. Then the next week I might ramp that up, 5% or something, And then the last week I might ramp that up another 5%. And then the week after that, light single, then they go into the meet, and then we start with their best triple. And then from there we start adding weight, right?
Yeah, it's very succinctly laid out. So if I kind of analyze your program that you just laid out there, right, what are you doing there? So you just talked about the specificity, right? You're getting them towards the practice of doing heavy singles, right? And you're doing it slowly, right? You're not going from 5 straight to singles. You're going from 5s to triples, right? Because the practice element here is, I think, twofold. Number one, you've got to train your body. I think there is some sort of central nervous component to this where if you've never done a 1RM and you've only done 5s, your central nervous system is not as efficient as it could be in doing a heavy weight for 1 rep. You just don't know how to, for lack of a better term, fire enough motor units to do that 1 RM. Now, you're probably pretty close to it, but I still think there is some sort of central nervous adaptation that has to take place to do a 1 RM. But then equally important, maybe even more important for the intermediate, is there's a lot of mental skill in executing a 1 RM, especially for something like a squat. Man, when you take out a 1 RM weight, that's a whole nother ball game than taking out a 5 RM weight. All right. It is crushing, and it's mentally that is the most, for me at least, that is the most mentally taxing thing for me to do. Yeah. It's to unrack a 1 RM squat, because from the word go, as soon as it leaves the hooks, it feels like it's about to just crush you in half down and just pin you to the bottom of the platform. Mm-hmm. And you have to mentally be okay with that feeling and dominate the bar, right? You've got to learn how to make that bar your bitch and take it on your ride, right? This is not the bar's ride. This is your ride, and you get to decide when that bar moves. And mentally, that's hard to do. It requires a lot of exposure to heavy singles, because you're just not going to get that feel. Like I think about, like, in terms of tightness, when I'm coming out of the rack, every time I taper myself towards doubles and singles, I have to relearn that extra notch of tightness before I unrack the bar, because, like, doing heavy 3s and 5s, like, I know how to get tight, right? I've done this enough times. I know how to get tight, but there's another notch there, and I have to relearn every single time I get into that rep range, because if you're not that tight coming out of the rack, it's all over. It's game over before you even started. So there's that specificity in practice right there. Okay, and then there's the second thing, which is that you had, in both examples for the novice and the intermediate, you had a period of time between their last heavy workout and the meet, where they're really they're either doing nothing, they're just purely resting, or they're doing very light work. And that is the fatigue dissipation, right? They have the novice has some amount of residual fatigue, that if they're truly still a novice and they're doing 3 sets of 5, on the AB, just vanilla program, then they don't have that much fatigue because they're not that advanced of a lifter yet. But there's still some, so they need to take 1 to 2 workouts off before the meet so that they feel fresh on meet day and they're at their 100% max capability. For the intermediate lifter, it's going to be a longer period of time, and we start looking at things like, I like to think of, where are the hormonal impacts from the last heavy work that this lifter's done going to peak for this lifter, right? And so I know that for an intermediate and more advanced lifter, somewhere between 7 to 10 days is a nice rule of thumb for if you've completed your openers, right? Your last heavy lift, then you've got a 7 to 10 day sort of hormonal peak that's going to happen. Right. And also that tends to coincide nicely with the amount of time it takes to recover so that you feel fresh when you step on the platform. Right. But the same concepts are there.
Yeah. And you also have to consider the length of time necessary. So typically, at least 7 days from a heavy squat. If somebody's real strong, you might need more.
Sure.
But, bench press, I find that the most common error I've seen in powerlifting coaches, and not so much in our circle, but powerlifting coaches will treat the bench press the same as a squat and deadlift, which is quite silly. They'll do this in the way that they program frequency and volume and all these things. And they'll also give too much time off. So you have to consider with the bench press, you're not loading the spine in compression. You're not pulling a weight in tension like you would in a deadlift. The spine is on the bench. It's arched. You're keeping your back nice and tight so that you have a stable platform to push off of, but you're not loading the spine like you do in a squat. So the bench press isn't quite as fatiguing as the squat or the deadlift. So I will often have a lifter do their last heavy bench press maybe 5 or 6 days out. Then I'll have a moderately heavy bench press program maybe 3 days out. And
that
typically works well.
85, 90% kind of range.
Yep. Yeah, because it responds well to frequency. You can train it at higher intensities for volume typically, and it'll detrain fast. As many people have known, you can skip a bench press on the linear progression And you'll feel that. You skip squat, it'll stay. You can repeat the weight. You might get more sore, same with the deadlift. But you skip a bench press, then you have to take weight off of it. You miss a rep that you might have otherwise gotten. So,
right.
There's that to consider.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So when we talk about these lifts, they're all on their own timeline. Don't try to force these lifts all into the exact same timeline, because it doesn't work that way. And it's the same thing, we talk about in the starting strength world. There's always a common question, like, when do I move on from the novice program? And it's like, some people think it's like a wholesale. It's like, well, I was doing this template. Now I need to switch to the Texas method and I need to grab that template where everything now is, in that model. It's like, no. You move one lift at a time as needed.
That's right.
Yeah. So squat, I agree. You're going to want to, if you are an intermediate lifter, you're going to want to probably take a week between your last heavy attempt and meet day. And for me, are you normally doing like the test day, 7 days out or 10 days out, somewhere around in that ballpark? Where they're going to test their openers and maybe second attempts?
Like 5 days out for that.
Okay.
Yeah, 5 days out.
Okay, yeah, so you can think of it as maybe, if you're doing Texas method, maybe your last volume day on squat is 7 to 10 days out from the meet day, right? And then 5 days out is when you're hitting your openers, right? So if you finished your Texas method run at, let's say, 350 for a set of 5, and then you work that up to like 365, 375 for a set of 3, then you might be looking at doing your opener somewhere around your best set of 365, 375 maybe, if you want to go a little bit heavier. And then you might hit a second attempt on that test day that's a little bit heavier than that. But you're not going maximal yet, right? You don't go for a 1 RM on that day, on that test day. You're just hitting your opener, which is a very confident triple, maybe a double, and then you're hitting something a little bit heavier, and you leave it at that. It's really, for most people, it's going to be like 2 to 4 reps is all they're doing total, 2 to 4 singles, and you'll have plenty of time to recover from that. Deadlift, I think you mentioned this earlier. Deadlift, you may want to do this test 7 to 10 days out from the meet, right? Because for, especially the more advanced you get, the longer it takes to recover from heavy deadlifting. So again,
absolutely.
You're going to follow the exact same thing, right? You want to take a confident heavy triple for you and make that your opener, right? And do a little bit more for a second attempt. And then kind of where you're going to be on meet day. So I think this is something that I've seen a lot of people screw up that don't have a coach. I had a guy message me recently, and I hope you're listening. I'm sorry, I'm gonna rag on you a little bit here. So I had a guy message me. He's turning 60 very soon, and he really wanted to pull 300 on his birthday or before his birthday. That's the way he worded it. I want to pull 300 before my birthday, and I'm turning 60, I think, this week. And I'm like, okay, great. So I just asked him, what are you doing? So he's just been doing basically the novice linear progression. So I said, okay, well, tell you what, alternate a heavy deadlift with a light deadlift, because I knew I wanted him to sort of start to bleed off a little bit of fatigue because he'd been doing novice linear progression for a while. And then I said, okay, this many days out from the event, which is going to be his 300-pound pull, I want you to do some tests, right? And I want you to work up to a nice heavy single, and then maybe do 5% more if that felt pretty good, and then stop, right? And then rest, and then 7 days later, I want you to go for 300. So the guy does this, and he gets back to me after his test day. He's like, hey, man, I forget what he did. I think he pulled like 275 or 280. And I'm like, great. And then he's like, a few days later, he's like, I just pulled 295. Can't wait to pull 300 on my birthday. And I'm like, I didn't respond because this was in the middle of me traveling, but I'm like, dude, what are you doing? That was your time. You should have pulled 300.
Hey, why would you do 295?
Why would you do 295 in the first place, right? Just put 5 more pounds in there. You won't notice the difference, I promise, right? But see, here's the problem. Let's think about our principles here. What did he do? He basically prepared himself by doing lower rep sets. So he built his specificity up towards that single, right? He hit some practice singles, and then he waited a period of time to let his fatigue dissipate, and then he hit what was supposed to be his peak, single on the deadlift, and he did 295. He stopped short of his goal, and he easily could have done 300, right?
Yeah.
He probably could have pulled 315 based on his numbers. So now what's going to happen? Okay, so he's gone through this peak. Now his fitness is going to have gone down because he's taken his foot off the gas, and he no longer has the stress of work sets across, and he no longer has the same workload to drive further adaptation, right? We took the foot off the gas so he would be maximally prepared for that one day. And you can't just do it again a few days later.
No.
Right? Now, this guy's a novice, so he might actually pull that off. I hope you do, by the way. I hope you do.
He probably will.
If you are a more advanced lifter, there's absolutely no way you can do that. You have no way you can peak for a certain day and then 5 days later or even 3 days later do it again, right? It's not going to happen. And so I point this out because I've seen people mess this up a lot. And the other thing that I've seen that's a misunderstanding amongst newer lifters is, when we talk about, it's common for us in the strength world to refer to our best lifts as 1RMs. So if I ask you, what do you deadlift? You're probably going to answer with your 1RM.
Yeah.
You're like, 515.
They'll answer with fives.
Whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And we'll specify if we mean for reps. So I think newer lifters sometimes think if that guy's a 500-pound puller, he can pull 500 whenever he wants to. And it's not the case, No. I've pulled 500. I cannot pull 500 today, right? There's no way. It's not going to happen because I peaked when I pulled that 500, right? I can't just do it whenever.
This is why a lot of exercise science research is bullshit too, because they'll have them doing sets of 20 and sets of 10 and sets of 8 in most of these studies, and then they'll test their 1RM before and after, and it's that's not their 1RM, It's not their 1RM. Right. That was a single on that day,
Yeah.
And that single improves over time because they've progressively overloaded them, but that's not their 1RM. So then they'll say, there's no difference between training protocols and 1RM strength. That's horseshit. Anyways, people don't respect the intensity. That's really the problem. They think that, as long as they feel tired and get a pump or having a manic episode that day, they can max out and, get a new PR. I once had a girl that learned this the hard way. She was a fine lifter, and she said, she would always say, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's never enough. And because, 5 sets of 5 is not enough, And she was self-aware enough to, trust me and do it the way I wanted her to do it. And she ran out Texas method for about a year straight. Female, early intermediate, under 30. And I told her, she had done an LP, finished that. And I'm like, if you really want a challenge, run out Texas method, but I'm telling you, you're going to hate lifting by the end of it.
Right.
Because I've seen people quit. Nobody rides it out. And she was determined to ride this out. And, she had a meet in the middle of it. So she did a meet, had to reset the squat and deadlift, kept the press and bench press going after the meet, because she was an early intermediate. The meet didn't crush her shoulders, And, she went a whole year. And by the end of it, she was down to singles on her squat. I think she was $120 at the time. She squatted 250. Yeah, 250.
Yeah, that's
pulled
big squat.
Pulled 290, pressed 110, benched, I think 135, 140. And at the end, I'm like, so, is it enough? She's like, it's enough.
Right.
So I never forgot that. She conceptually understood what we were doing there with all the weight, but psychologically, she, I could do more,
Yeah, right,
and,
right. That's another thing. That's a great point. And that's another thing I've seen people mess up is while they are in the process of peaking, they'll feel really great. They'll hit that heavy single that they're programmed for that day. And then maybe they've got a back off set. They're like, oh man, I felt so good. I did 3 more back off sets. Mm-hmm. And you're like, dude, no, you missed the point. You should feel great when you are getting really close to the meet, right? So basically, if you're doing this right, and you're an intermediate. If you're a novice, you can just forget this part. But if you're an intermediate, if you do this right, somewhere 3 to 4 weeks out from a meet, you're going to feel like absolute dog shit.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be tapping out. You'll be like, Coach, I don't know about this. There's no way I'm going to be able to do a meet. I'm beat up. Everything hurts. We get it. Just hang on. Just hang on. There's a plan here. And all of a sudden, you'll get 2 weeks out from the meet, and you're like, okay, all right, I'm feeling good now. These singles actually feel like they're not crushing me anymore. And then, 1 week out from the meet, you're like, wow, I'm feeling even better. And you step on that platform and you feel awesome. You feel awesome, right? So that's all part of the plan, right? If you do a whole bunch more work when you're not programmed to, you're going to mess up the peak because we're trying to dissipate fatigue, not add more.
This is one of the reasons why you have to consider why you're doing a meet. So this is why I stopped doing meets, was because, we can generally program a peak and get pretty close. Right. But anybody who tells you I'm going to get you a PR on meet day is lying to you.
Right.
It might happen. If that happens on accident, great. We're going to do everything we can and using the principles that we've outlined here. But in my experience, when I was lifting in meets, I think I hit a PR at my first one, obviously, because it was my first one. But then after that, as I got more advanced with this, it didn't happen. I don't know that I've ever hit a PR at a meet other than at my first meet. So I kept getting frustrated. I do these meets, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to get it this time. And then nothing. I would actually lift less than what I'd done in the gym before. Then I'd have these guys that would be like, oh, it only counts if it happened in a meet, and I bought into that very briefly, that bullshit. Then I'm like, fuck that. I'm like, if you pick it up, you pick it up, So
right. Yep.
I got sick of all of it, and mostly with powerlifting. I enjoyed strengthlifting meets. The powerlifting meets kind of got me because you got a 2-hour weigh-in. I was a lighter lifter at the time, so I dehydrated easier because I had less places to put it,
Right.
And I'd lift like shit because, all the frickin' dietary manipulations necessary to make the weight. And I'd typically stay at the top of the weight class, I didn't fuck around with low carb and diuretics or anything like that, but I would, cut my sodium back and fast the night before, then wait in line for this stupid 2-hour weigh, and then I'd try to rehydrate. It would never. Anyways, I got sick of that, and I'm like, I want a PR. So if you want to just PR, and that's all you care about, you can run through what we just outlined in the gym. Some people think that's silly. Rip thinks that's silly. He hates, why you do a single in the gym? I understand that. You're a competitor. He was a competitor. Powerlifting was a sport. But personally, I wanted to pull 500 pounds. But, how many years ago was that? 4 years ago? Or 3 years ago? 2022? Yeah. 4 years ago. 4 years ago was the first time I pulled it. And the years leading up to that, about 5 years leading up to that, that's all I can think about. And I got sick and tired of all this other bullshit and, the PR not being there on the right day. And I'm just like, I'm eliminating all the variables. And in the words of Kirk Karwoski, when it ain't Christmas in the gym every day. So when it's Christmas, I'm picking the fucking weight up,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Sometimes, especially when you get to be an advanced lifter, when you have a day that you just know, things are golden, you just got to go for it, man. You got to throw the program out the window and go for it.
Yeah.
Because you just don't get those very often.
No. And, if you're a novice, early intermediate, you don't have to worry about that. But as you go on, if PRs are what you care about, you don't have to register for a meet to do that. But if you enjoy competition, camaraderie, powerlifting is the one sport where your competitor and their family will root for you.
Right. Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
And nobody cares, really, unless it's this IPF Worlds, nobody cares who wins the meet. Nobody cares. Nobody cares who wins the weight class. Everybody just wants to see everyone lift PRs. I've been to a meet where there's an 83-year-old guy pulling 185, and it's that guy got as many cheers as the guy who pulled 705. So that's what makes these things fun. One other thing that came up while you were talking about that is, and this is not an episode about what to do specifically for a powerlifting meet, on meet day or anything like that. But I'll say this: if you are doing a weight class event and you are not a very competitive lifter, and by that I mean probably having years of experience in this sport, do not worry about your weight class. Eat your food. Just eat a lot of food. Because especially if you're trying to do high-intensity work, like we are in the strength sports, where we're tapering towards that 1RM, you need a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of food on board. You need a lot of resources in order to maximize your expression of strength. You've talked about why that is in previous episodes. So this is not the time to be like, well, I don't know, I'm 199, 202 or something like that. I think I want to cut down to the 198s. Bad idea. Don't do it. Do not cut going into a strength meet. And probably, I have less experience with this, but you probably shouldn't be trying to cut going into a conditioning focused meet either, whether it's a bike race or a run, run or whatever.
It's a performance sport.
It's a performance sport. You need to be eating so that you can perform at maximum capacity. So just don't do that. Now, for people who are much more advanced and have much more experience doing this, yes, that is the time to maybe consider targeting a specific weight class. Mm-hmm. But, at that point, it's a whole different ballgame. You've got a lot of experience, you know your limits, and you know how much you can get away with there. But if you're a novice, if this is your first, second, or even fifth meet, just don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Like I said, Nobody cares who wins.
And you're not going to get fat from doing singles and low volume and that's bullshit. You're lifting a heavy weight, and I think I just wrote about this. This may have dropped today. I think Bree said they were publishing my article, so you want to check this out. But I talked about you're not going to get fat from doing singles because it's heavy, and you need anybody who has tried to lift heavy on low calories before learns quickly that it doesn't work. You start missing. You're all beat up, but we've also learned that we can pump out a bunch of reps on low calories, So what does that tell you? I don't need a p-value and an exercise science lab to figure out that when the weight is lighter, you can muscle through it on less resources. And when the weight is heavier, you need more resources to get it up. I mean, it's quite obvious. Anybody who's tried to lift a very heavy weight, whether it's a 1RM or a 5-rep set to failure, knows that, shit, man, I got 5 pounds less for 3 days ago, and then I only did 1 or 2 this time. Why? Well, what'd you eat? Well, I got drunk this weekend and ate like 1,500 calories. Well, here you go when he needs 4,000.
Right.
So, it's silly. The calories follow the intensity. You're not going to get fat. Obviously, there's something about lifting a very heavy weight that requires you to eat more food that you probably can't measure in an exercise physiology lab, and that's why there's no articles on it. How do you measure that? The only way to measure energy expenditure during a lift is to get a direct calorimeter, a whole room direct calorimeter, which, this was 10 years, 15 years ago. They said it was $1 million, so it's probably $5 million now, $2 million. I don't know how much inflation has hit that market, but in 2008, when I was first taking these classes, the number 1 million used to pop up. So we're talking about a 7-figure investment just to measure how much guys burn when they're trying to get jacked, in the gym.
Can we get Ray Williams to like squat 1,000 in a calorimeter? That'd be awesome.
That'd be cool. So like right now, if you're trying to use instruments that were used for aerobic steady state training for lifting, you're getting junk data because it's not validated for that. I think a whole room calorimeter is probably going to produce some reasonable data because you're measuring heat, and that's what when you measure heat, you're measuring how much heat is being expended by the person, Right. And that is a reflection of how many calories you're expending, right? How much energy you're expending. So, I'd say it's probably reasonably accurate, but we're not going to spend a couple $1 million to measure how many calories you're burning when you're squatting. What we know is when you're running on E, you can't lift heavy, but you can pump out reps,
Yep.
So the chances are that you're going to become a big fat guy by keeping enough calories in you so you can max out are probably pretty low. These guys kind of go into meets, and stay in their weight class, and they're eating a shitload of food going into it. So,
I always, just kind of anecdotally, like it always surprises me when I've done strength lifting meets. Mm-hmm. Like you said, you weigh out at the end after your last deadlift attempt. And I always weigh out like 2 or 3 pounds lighter than I expect to. So I'm always like a 198.
Right.
Most of the time I've been a 198 lifter, and I'm usually like right around 198 in the weeks leading up to the meet. And, I usually crush a huge meal the night before. And so I'm going in there like nice and full, and it always surprises me how much water I pee out during the meet. And so I end up, 194, 195, 193 sometimes. And that's on plenty of food intake. So yeah, it's really not, it's not going to happen. Plus, we're only talking about crushing the calories for like a 4-week period. You're not going ham for months at a time.
No, we don't fully understand anaerobic metabolism because we don't have a convenient way to measure it. So, those are academic arguments that can stay in academia. Yeah. We don't need to go there. What we know is you need to be well fed if you're going to lift heavy, and intensity has an impact on your metabolism just as volume does. And even high volume lifting is pretty low volume in terms of repetitions compared to strides on a run or, how many revolutions on a bike, like you're not doing very much in the weight room. So if you're basing it off that, you're ignoring the intensity component. The reason that lifting is effective is because you're doing more intensity, compared to an aerobic activity. So, kind of leave you with that. I think that, we could expand on this volume forever problem in a non-competitive context. We talked about it in the context of meets and meet prep, but I know that this concept comes up on topics of just general training and weight loss and other things. So I think we need to expand on that, and we can do that in another episode. But I hope that this kind of helps people. With
illustrates the point nicely, doesn't it? Yeah. You can check out your article. It's called "Fat Loss Training is Not Training." Fat loss training in scare quotes. Mm-hmm. It came out February 23rd, 2022. So go check that out on startingstrength.com.
Better share that.
I'll leave you with one more thought that I had. I actually encourage my lifters to do some sort of mock meets from time to time. Maybe once a year. That's plenty if they don't really have any aspirations to compete. I think once a year is plenty. You could do it twice a year if you really want to. But I do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that, lifting is a training modality, but it's also a skill. And I think that, like we described earlier in this episode, doing singles is a skill. And if you never do them in a gym, then you're kind of missing out on a big part of lifting, right? That is a skill that you should have. The other part of it is you learn some interesting things about yourself when you prep yourself for a meet or a test event, right? Even if it's just a mock meet in your home gym or whatever. You'll learn over time, after doing this a few times, you'll learn what percentage of your best 5RM or 3RM or double leading up to your test event, what percentage can you convert into a single, right? We were talking about this off mic earlier, but I learned that over time, I've learned that if I can hit a 3RM on my press, I can reasonably be assured that 3RM will be somewhere between 87 and 90% of my 1 rep max. Mm-hmm. When I'm really on, it's 87% of my 1 rep max. When I'm not having such a great day on the meet day, it'll be 90% of my 1 rep max, right? So that can help me predict progress, because like you said, meet day, there's a lot of things that can happen on meet day, right? Maybe you ate something bad the night before. Maybe you're really stressed out because something happened, or you got a lot of work, or there's a family issue. There's all sorts of things that can throw you off of being at your absolute maximum potential. And you can't really control most of those things. So over time, if you've done these peaking periods, what you will get is you will get really good data during your peak. Even if your actual event day, meet or mock meet, even if that's not so great, the data that you gain along the way, I think, is really useful for any lifter. So even if you don't aspire to compete, I think this is something you should do, is set up some sort of mock competitions for yourself, if only to get the training experience and the data from it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's probably a good place to end off, huh?
Alrighty. So, again, April 23rd?
Yes, we have a strengthlifting meet at Wichita Falls Athletic Club, April 23rd. If anything, it'd be fun to go, because if you have not been to the WFAC, it is worth seeing. It is the mecca of strength training. We all love going there, lifting there, hanging out with Rip. So, if you haven't done a meet yet, this would be a good first one. It's well run. They kind of have a well-oiled machine there. I've decided to take on the role of meet director since, Nick Delgadillo's all Hollywood now, too high in demand. So, I decided to sign up for, as Rip puts it, they're a pain in the ass. I signed up for the pain in the ass of directing this meet. Although it's not, because they've streamlined it. I'm just, I'm doing the organizing part, and I've, held meets at my gym, and this will be more fun. I like driving out there too. It's a nice little road trip, but definitely check out this meet. It'll be fun. We'll have a good time.
So you can go to startingstrength.com to find that. Go on there's a little sidebar on the home screen. You can go down to meets, and then you'll see a link to that meet in Wichita Falls, April 23rd. You can sign up there. If you want to do it, sign up now. And then, start thinking about how you're going to peak, right? Do what Santana recommended. Walk back from the meet. You've got 7 or 8 weeks from the time you sign up if you do it today. And, best of luck. We want to hear about it. Let us know. If you do that, actually, send us a message. Let us know how it goes.
All right, so let's sign off. Thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at www.weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana or weights _and_plates.
Fantastic. You can find me, Trent, at marmaladecream.com. Send me an email there, or you can find me on Instagrams at marmalade_cream. And I have, I don't know when this is going to happen, hopefully by the next episode that we put out. I'm working on a new website for my coaching and gym services, so
nice.
That'll be coming up soon. So I won't have to send you to Marmalade Cream. I know it sounds a little weird for coaching and lifting, but Jones Barbell Club will be coming soon.
All right.
Talk to you all in a couple weeks.